Okay, everyone, hello. Good time to get started. We're on the last sprint to the finish now.
We realise we stand between you and the pub. So
we'll try and keep this easy to understand. I know it's hard after 2 days of intense listening and engaging in workshops and the like. So we're going to talk about design sprints and why we think they're an interesting process. Just before we start, it'd be useful to understand a little bit about who you guys are and what your disciplines are. So who's involved with delivery? So actually hands-on design and build. Put your hands up, please. Thank you. Okay, so about maybe 3/4. Keep your hand up if you have ever been in a situation where you've been building something, you spent a good amount of time on it, and realized shortly afterwards that it wasn't that important. Can you keep your hand up for that? Okay, so actually a similar amount of people. So who's involved in making decisions about products and services and what you should spend your time on? Actually, yeah. So some crossover there, but actually some different people, hands up. And so when you have those discussions about product enhancements and where you should spend your time and resources, put your hand up if those are painless and efficient discussions that you have at all stages. Okay, not one single hand. Okay, so it's hard to figure out what to build, and it's also hard to have really productive conversations about how to build stuff. You know, it's hard to get to the right answer, and the process itself can be hard as well. My name's Alastair.
And I'm Darwin.
And we have a consultancy called Product Pilot, and we specialize in discovery. And we're trying to figure out how best to help teams come to a conclusion about what they should be building and have more productive conversations about that. And we've been doing this for a while independently before we formed a company. We work for a variety of different organizations, big ones, small ones, public sector. And we tend to do, a process you're probably quite familiar with. It's a design thinking model. It's a user-centered model where we begin by empathizing with customers, trying to figure out what their needs are. Then we try and pinpoint a specific need that is, we're going to focus on, something that's really valuable. We define that problem, and then we figure out, we come up with some ideas for how we might solve that problem. We prototype and we test. Are you familiar with this? Do I get any sort of murmurs of yes? And then we go around the loop again once we've got some feedback on our prototypes. And if we're really smart, we can not only test the end result that we're trying to get feedback on, but we identify sort of interim steps just where we can test our assumptions that are underpinning our ideas, according to like the lean startup kind of method. So this is all pretty well understood stuff now. But in practice, it kind of doesn't always deliver the understanding that we hope in our experience. Kind of what often happens is, or certainly, things are getting more agile now, and there's more a collaborative process. But the kind of classic route is you have a discoverer, someone who's a user researcher or UXer, or someone who's charged with finding out about users and what they need, or what we should be focusing on. And they tend to do some interviews with stakeholders, and then they'll talk to users and understand the needs of the users. And they might do some desk research and look at what competitors are doing and what the trends are in the market, that kind of thing. And then there'll be like a sort of intense period of synthesis and analysis where they'll be doing some hard thinking about what that all means, and trying to figure out the kind of core insights. And then you kind of come back and you present your ideas. This is what we should be focusing on. This is the problem. Here's some potential solutions that we might consider. And it can go well, but kind of what often happens is that some of the stakeholders, because they've not been involved with the process throughout, they're still kind of wedded to their pre-existing view of the world. And you may have a really compelling story to tell, but it may just not match it may challenge their kind of view and their position in the company or whatever, and so things either don't move forward in the way that you'd hoped exactly, or they get watered down in some way. And that's one problem. Another problem is that the team that you might be might take this into delivery may not quite fully understand the nuances of what you've picked up in your research process. This is what I call the slippery ball syndrome. It's hard to grasp all the nuances that you've picked up along the way. And the problem, as we see it, is that this kind of intense process of figuring out what it all means and sort of analysis and synthesis happens over a relatively long period of time. I mean, it's quite often you don't even get a chance to do this, so you're quite lucky to be able to do research in this way these days. The researcher tends to sort of do it alone or in a small team, and the stakeholders aren't involved. It's a bit like, the difference between going on holiday and then seeing someone else's photo album from their holiday. You just can't get the experience, right? And that's a pretty well acknowledged metaphor. So what's needed is a way of involving your stakeholders and your team in the process as much as possible. And this is an image from a piece of research that we've done recently with the Department of Health, looking at how we can take a paper service and digitize it and make it more user-friendly and reduce cost. And so our participant is up here on the left, and the stakeholder is being held by some sort of woman we've never seen before. And so it can be done, but we're lucky enough to be working within this sort of GDS framework where there's a discovery phase which is up front and recognises something that's important to do, and therefore our stakeholders are able to make time for it. But even then, we have to shift things around and make space for it. So what's needed is something that's a little bit more in tune with the kind of cadence of the modern sort of rapid delivery, the kind of modern digital business. Are you going to click on that?
Yeah. And that's why we're excited about design sprints, which is why you're all here. So we're now going to explain a little bit about what they are and why we think they're great. So they're kind of popularized by these two chaps from Google Ventures, which is Google's investment capital. So they invest in things like Slack, Airbnb, lots of big startups that you've probably heard of. And they've run over 150 of these design sprints. So when we're talking about design sprints today, we're talking about their kind of version of that. And they've written a great book, we recommend it, which sets out kind of all the steps you need to go through. So what this means is that you take the kind of design thinking process that we talked about earlier in our kind of classic discovery, so user-centered design, lean thinking, but you compress it down to 5 days, so it's much more practical for people. And that means that you're much more likely to get the right people in the room because it's more practical in that short period. You can get time in people's diaries. Because it's time boxed and because you're going to be testing with users at the end of the week, it's very focused. There's no time for faffing. You have to cut things down to what's essential. None of those kind of meandering conversations that we all have suffered through in the past. And it encourages great teamwork because everyone's working together on a shared problem, shared goal, and that time between stakeholders and delivery team is also really invaluable for setting kind of foundations for future work. So if you've got a new client relationship, it's a great way to build that bond and trust with your client and between your team and your client. Now, we all know about hippos, the highest paid person's opinion. Now, their input is really important, but the process makes space for them to express their opinions, but without kind of sidetracking you and leading you kind of astray. So, hippo management built in. And at the end of the sprint, you have a tangible prototype that you can show to people, get feedback from other stakeholders who weren't part of the sprint, rather than just a kind of list of requirements or a backlog, which most stakeholders can't make heads or tails of that. And you've also got validated learning and feedback from doing the user testing at the end of the week. So how does it work? So as we said, it's a 5-day process, and the time is intensely mapped out. So they've produced a checklist that shows you exactly what you should do minute by minute on each day to make sure you get to the end of your week with your prototype done and your testing. And the key thing is that you're working in a cross-functional team. Hopefully we're all working in cross-functional teams already, but we don't usually work alongside our kind of main decider. So your decider is someone senior in the team, maybe a head of product or a CEO if it's a small startup, someone who's got the authority to green light what comes out of the sprint. So you don't have to go back afterwards and sell in the idea to the rest of the organisation.
Okay, so how does it play out through the week? So Monday is about understanding the problem we're trying to solve within this sprint. You start out by perhaps someone from the business or perhaps the decider outlines the kind of business goal that you're trying to work towards, something that's meaningful and inspirational. And then you spend Monday trying to figure out first of all, how you might get there, and then what might go wrong in that process, and what kind of questions that you need to answer in order to sort of validate your assumptions about how you might get there. And so you do a session on the goals, then you move into trying to understand the kind of customer journey that you're working with, and where you might be able to make improvements to the existing journey. Then you invite a variety of experts from across the business, perhaps from customer service, or from finance, or from people who deal in different areas that might be affected by what you might be looking at, to kind of give their perspective on that and kind of update this map. So you end up with a kind of an understanding of the problem space and where you might be applying your efforts. And then towards the end of the day, you pick a target. You decide, actually, we're going to focus on this particular stage in the journey, because if we get this right, then the rest becomes easier. And if we can't do that, then the whole thing, becomes, a really difficult challenge. So you pick your target on Monday.
Okay, and on the Tuesday, there's two main things. The first thing is you're looking for inspiration. How are other people solving the same problem that you have? But you need to look outside your industry, look sideways. You also need to think about ideas that your team may have already, but they haven't had time to fully implement. But perhaps they've done a little bit of experimentation and they've got something that they can show you that will help with that problem. In terms of looking sideways, in the book they give a great example of a coffee company that wanted to kind of translate the experience about being able to talk to a barista about what type of coffee you prefer, and take that online where there's no barista to have that conversation with you. And they copied an idea from a chocolate bar where they had a kind of flavour wheel, and they applied that to coffee and brought out flavours like kind of bright and cherry and those kind of things, so people could get a real sense of what the coffee's like. And then in the afternoon, it's about coming up with sketches of possible solutions to the challenge that you've set for that sprint. So the key thing here is that the word sketching tends to scare people, because people go, I can't sketch, I can't draw. But you really just need to be able to draw lines and circles, and that's it. So anyone can do that. And you go through this process of kind of notes, through ideas, then kind of crazy eights, which is kind of rapid idea generation, and then you come up with a kind of concrete solution. And it's all time boxed, so it helps guide people through it, and the power of constraints means that people work quickly. And the idea is you're actually working in silence, so you kind of, they describe it as kind of thinking alone together, which is much more effective than a rubbish brainstorm where people go, what about this idea, what about this idea? You don't actually make any progress. You've got time to concentrate and come up with real ideas together. Oh, and I almost forgot, don't forget to recruit your users. So on the Friday, you're going to be testing with people, so you need to start the process of getting your real customers lined up, ready to come in on the Friday. And that's usually done by the facilitator.
Okay, so having sketched your ideas alone on Tuesday afternoon, you come in on Wednesday morning, and the facilitator has kindly sort of laid them out on the wall. So each of the idea has a space, a bit like they call it a gallery. And you, as a group, you begin to sort of look at these ideas. And you do so sort of individually to begin with. You go and make notes in a process called sort of like silent review. So you look through the each of the ideas yourself, and then you begin to apply like the dots to different parts of ideas or different elements of the ideas that you like, so that through the team you create like a bit of a heat map. You can see the interesting areas of the designs that people have come up with. And then you go through a group critique. So the facilitator will walk through each of the designs, each of the concepts, and describe the areas that are being pulled out in the heat map, and then only then does the sort of author of the design get to kind of add their perspective on what they were trying to achieve. So what's quite nice about this is that you are influenced by the position or the the kind of verbosity or brilliant explanation of the author. It's actually, the design sort of stands on its own. So having done that and had this chance to sort of understand the designs a bit more deeply, you have a straw poll, you make a vote, each person gets a vote as to which concept they feel is strongest. And finally, the decider, what's he called, the dude in 18?
Murphy.
Murphy. So he gets a chance, or she gets a chance, to kind of cast a super vote and direct the team as to which concept that person feels is the strongest and it should be taken through to prototyping. Oh, and the next stage in the afternoon, you then think about how you might represent this idea in a prototype and what the sort of user journey is that you're going to be testing with users on the Friday. And so you storyboard that out. So you're essentially kind of prototyping the prototype that you're going to start building on Thursday.
And one interesting thing about that is you're creating a whole scenario from somebody first becoming aware of your product or service. So it might be a kind of article in the New York Times that mentions your service, through to them arriving on your site, all the way through to them using it. So that makes the prototype experience a bit more real for people. So on Thursday you do a prototype. Your prototype obviously needs to be quite simple because you're building it in a day. You're just trying to create enough sense of realism that it feels like a realistic scenario for people. So typically you might use something like Keynote, this kind of Keynote-topia, which is a set of stencils that you can use to create apps and websites, or something like Sketch. Just keep it really simple and fast. And because you've only got a day, you need to divide and conquer. So there's different jobs. So one person is the stitcher, joining all the different scenes together. One person's doing the artwork. One person's doing the copywriting. Another person is doing interviews, scripts for the Friday. So between you get it all done for the end of that day.
And finally, on Friday, you're doing your user test. You're listening to what potential customers and potential users have to say about your prototype. And there's a nice, if you're not familiar with doing user interviews, there's a really nice description, both in the Sprint book and online, by Matthew Margiela. I can't remember the guy's name, but if you Google it, you'll find it. I think it's on Medium. Really nice description of how to do a user interview and talk through this prototype that you made. And the key point is that the whole team then looks at the same time at this video feed of what's being said in the interview room and makes kind of collaborative notes. And at the end of the day, you then process those notes and come to a kind of conclusion quite quickly about what to do next. And so you kind of wrap up the whole process within that kind of window where you've got everyone engaged, particularly your deciders who may not have seen this kind of stuff before and really need to see this in order to be able to believe in the direction that you're taking.
So it's Friday afternoon when you bring the stakeholders back in then?
Ideally the stakeholders stay there on the Friday morning and they watch the interviews live.
Yeah.
So they're building that empathy from seeing customers either succeed or struggle with the design.
Yeah, you watch in the morning and then you kind of discuss and make decisions in the afternoon.
Yeah. And the other thing is that you don't need a lab to do this user testing, you just need 2 rooms and you can stream the video really easily from one room to the other. So there's no barriers to doing the testing. So awesome. At the end of the week, you've got validated feedback on whether your idea is a success and it's something you should build, or in only 5 days you found out perhaps your idea is not such a hit and you need to pivot and do something else. Either way, you've saved a lot of time and effort, so it's a win. So outcomes. You've got clarity on what's the most important problem that you need to solve, and even just getting that in many organisations is a real challenge, right? What's the most important thing that we need to solve for this product? It's not that easy to get that answer. You've got a prototype solution, you've got actionable user feedback, and you've also got a sense of momentum and shared understanding with your team.
Okay, so sounds kind of great, isn't it? But without certain ingredients, it won't work quite like that. In order to make this work, you kind of need a decent level of insight to begin with. If you haven't done any research into who your customers are, and you haven't decided who your customers are, and you don't understand what kind of lives they lead, and you haven't done your empathy maps and all that kind of stuff, if you haven't got real sense of that, then you probably need to do some of that before you go through this process. Because otherwise, you aren't wasting a lot of time, you're only wasting a week, but otherwise you may be making a lot of assumptions about all those things. So insight is important.
You also need to have the right skills. So as we said earlier, you do need to have a cross-functional team so that you've got a range of perspectives. So somebody from product, somebody who's a decider, somebody from a design background. So you've got all of those aspects covered off amongst your skill set.
So freedom, you need as a team to be able to pursue the ideas that you come up with and pursue the problems that you in that group deem to be the most important ones. That's the kind of point of having the decider there, and you need that freedom to maneuver. If you're going to end up like coming up with stuff, but someone outside of that process is going to, put the kibosh on it before it's even had the chance to work, then you're not ready to sprint. You need to get the ability to pursue your ideas before you start.
And you need to have the right space. So you need a good sized room, plenty of room for, when you put up your pictures on the wall, you need to have enough room that everyone can look at each of the different ideas without being crowded. You need at least 2 whiteboards. It needs to be the same space for the whole week because you need to leave stuff up on the boards. So it's no good if you can only have it between 1 and 4 on a Friday. It's not going to work. You need the whole time dedicated.
So we need commitment. We need people in the room to kind of be in the room, to actually engage in the process. There's a rule around no devices during the sessions. You're able to step out, and there's breaks, so you can keep on with your other projects or your other concerns. But when you're in the room, people need to be committed to this process. And without that, it kind of tends to unravel a little bit.
Yep. And you need to have a facilitator. So ideally somebody who's not on your team, because they're going to want to get involved in the problem solving. So if you can bring in somebody else from one of your other teams or somebody external, and they need to be quite strong because you need to be able to cut people off at the right time, but do it gracefully so they don't get annoyed, but just to keep people on track and be quite strong through that week. So when to sprint?
When to sprint. So hands up is familiar with this dual track agile idea, where you have discovery or sort of continuous design and discovery on one track and delivery on another, and this kind of cross-population of people and ideas going between the two. This is something that Marty Kagan, who I'm a great fan of, kind of product guru, Silicon Valley Product Group's written a great book called How to Make Products That Users Love, I think. Something that he talks about, and it makes sense. I've heard organisations who, I've not used it myself, and it wasn't kind of a thing that I was aware of when I was in that role, but I've heard lots of organisations having success with this kind of idea. But I wouldn't recommend trying to sprint continuously, okay? Because there's a reason why it's kind of called a sprint. It's kind of tiring. And it's quite intense, so you kind of need a bit of a gap between sprints to kind of reassess, maybe get some more insight, figure out where the gaps in your knowledge are. It's a kind of tool in your discovery box. It's not the only method to use, and really it's kind of for use when you're trying to involve a wider group than perhaps your core team and who's working on design and development. So next one.
So some good times to sprint. So when you really need a verdict on something, you need to get clarity on which direction you're going to go in. You're trying to get alignment amongst your stakeholders around this is the direction we're going in. Where you've got a new team and they need to gel, so you're in that kind of forming phase of a team. Or when you need to kind of take a step back from the kind of day-to-day, think a bit more strategically about what you're doing, get a different perspective. Those are all good moments.
So when not to sprint, like I say, if you don't have kind of a core level of insight about customers and their needs, then you probably need to get that before you start. If it's pretty obvious which direction you should be going in and everyone's aligned, then it may not be necessary to have this kind of quite full-on week of activities. You can maybe handle that in your teams. If you can't get stakeholders to be interested in it, then it's not important enough, therefore it's not the right thing to be looking at. And obviously it ends in a piece of qualitative feedback on a prototype. And if that's not if you're not looking for kind of an emotional reaction to an idea or you know, that kind of feedback. If it's not about that, maybe you want actually to understand that, you know, how big is the market, or would people be prepared to pay a certain amount of money? You know, maybe a landing page is a better route to getting that kind of answer to that kind of question. So it's not always. It depends on what question you're trying to solve or what to answer. So, it's a whistle-stop tour of design sprints. Just to recap, so, you know, deciding what to build and getting that right, and having a useful discussion about that can be hard, as evidenced by the shows of hands earlier. Discovery, therefore, is needed. It's a process which is designed to make it less hard. But the way that kind of classic phase discovery has worked often means that it just falls short. We need that shared understanding within the team and within sort of wider stakeholder group. And it needs to be in tune with the way that sort of modern business works and a more agile way of working. And so we think design sprints is a pretty good idea. And we've had, you know, we've enjoyed the ones we've done, and we've had a good level of success and got quite a long way in a relatively short period of time. And having worked in this area for quite some time and sort of spent quite a lot of time in meetings discussing ideas and going around in circles, and, you know, weeks go by and things get discussed and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's really quite refreshing to end up with a pretty clear articulation of a problem and an idea in such a short space of time, you know, and with a group of people collaboratively working together. So we recommend it. Hopefully you'll get yourself out in front. Whack, whack. So here's a couple of resources. A lot of it's based on the book, but if you don't want to buy the book, there's a checklist on the website. It's a PDF you can download, which sort of tells you exactly what, you know, process to follow on each day. And there's another book, the author of whom we met at another conference, kind of came out just before. I think he was, you know, slightly eclipsed by the guys from Google who had a bit more PR cash behind them. But I think this is also a good reference point on this concept. So we'd be happy to have, you know, we've talked a lot at you. We'd be happy to take any questions you have about this before it's time for beer.
Yeah. So given the sprint, you were saying that step out may not be constant in that week. Do you get a bit of a feel for how many hours a day the team's fully engaged in it? Is it 2 hours a day, 8 hours a day?
The general pattern is sort of 10 till 5, with a good hour for lunch and some breaks in between as well. So keeping people refreshed. So the idea is you shouldn't feel exhausted. You should feel stretched by the sprint, but not exhausted by the end of it, because you need people to be able to keep the pace up through the week. So yeah. And that also means that people can do, you know, catch up on email or have meetings first thing in the morning, and then they can focus during the time of the sprint as well.
I was interested during the show you had the graph, you playing slides and show the thing.
Yeah.
Have they done design sprints with you?
Not with us.
No.
I believe some teams have done it,
Okay.
but it's generally sort of maybe in their alpha phase they might do that, or but I don't know exactly for sure, but I think I remember seeing a blog post about it. But
I'm obviously very interested in it, but I got the impression it was more for people that didn't have the luxury of being able to spend time
doing the research.
The proper phase approach.
Well,
Or needed a quick decision.
yeah, it can still be useful because, you know, you do your classic GDS style discovery, but then in your alpha phase you've got quite a lot of freedom about what you do there. The point is you need to prototype your service, but you can choose as a team how you do that, as long as you can show it your kind of service evaluation that you've done prototyping and you've tested it with users. So in your 8-week alpha, it would be a nice technique to slot into that.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is that it's a way of stakeholders engaging in a different way, and hopefully having a more productive kind of relationship with the people on the ground about, you know, and a better sense of their skills and, you know, where they're coming from, and so that when they engage with them later on, they have a greater sense of empathy with their teams as well as their users. So it could be useful. I would say it could be useful in that regard as well. Yes.
Do you find any risk with those stakeholders saying that if you do a sprint, then that's it, it's done? and a good understanding we have to do maybe more.
Mhm.
Because obviously in 1 week, lots of projects, you won't be able to find the real solution in 1 week.
No. We haven't found that. I mean, I think so. The question is there a risk that stakeholders will believe it's done after a week and not kind of recognise the need to iterate? We haven't found that because you tend to kind of get to a sketch or direction, a kind of an idea that's represented, but there's always loads of holes in it, and there's always loads of room for improvement. You know, you're unlikely to knock the ball out of the park on the first week, and so they're there in the playback, the user research, and they can see the reactions, and you know, it's unlikely that it's going to be perfect, and they're going to recognise the need to continue.
Have you guys, or did it in the sprint, give any examples of design sprints that have been done across distributed teams? So like designer in one office, dev in the other office, and can that work? Has it worked?
I don't think they mention it they definitely don't mention it in the book, but they've written a kind of Medium blog called sprintstories.com, which is worth checking out. And there may be a story on there of somebody who's done it remotely. But, I mean, it's actually quite a good opportunity if you've got a distributed team and you can make the investment. This is a great way to kind of make that week of bringing people together productive. So that would always be my recommendation is, you know, bring the people together and you've got a real activity. It's better than a sort of away day. So.
Yeah, because there's all the sort of human aspects, the kind of the bonding that goes on as well, and that you know, it's hard to replicate that remotely. I know it can be done, but it's harder.
Hi.
I sort of can immediately see issues with some of the deciders that I would work with.
Uh-huh.
One from the point of view of the amount of time that they can be spending with an internal team.
Yeah.
But two, them having any skills in the prototyping type part of the work, I can't see them doing anything.
So one of the jobs on the prototyping day is kind of asset collector, which is, you know, go out and find the things we need to put into the prototype. It's basically search for things on Google Images. So that's a good kind of stakeholder place, babysitter.
The other one I can see is them saying, well, why am I building a prototype? That's what I'm paying you for.
I think generally they find it's fun. A lot of the things that stakeholders have to do are dull, and this is, you know, a bit more like play. It's fun, so hopefully you can win them over that way. Once, you know, get them excited at the start of the week by the challenge. If a stakeholder really can't commit for the whole week, the times that you need them there are the Monday for the kind of setting the scene, and ideally the Tuesday to do the solution, because you know, if they don't turn up for the Tuesday, where that's a chance to draw your ideas, they can't then come back at the end of the sprint and say, well, why isn't my idea in the sprint? Because, and also on the Wednesday when you're deciding on the ideas. And then on the Friday. So really, they can have Thursday off. If they really need to play golf on Thursday, they can. But
yeah,
you know,
that's the one day where I suppose they could be a little bit less engaged. But they have to kind of they can't, if they leave it to the team to create the thing that's going to be tested, then they can't kind of start picking holes in that and say, well, you know, when I left on Wednesday evening, I thought it was this, and now it turns out you built this on Thursday.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have it that way.
The world still functions if
they're
you
leave it to the team, and you delegate. There's this idea of delegation of the decider. You know, the decider has to step out and get delegated as well.
Yeah. There was a question at the.
Yeah, is there an optimum amount of stakeholders?
Yeah.
So generally, you'd have one decider, and then your other stakeholders are more kind of subject matter experts. So they're there on the Monday to give their insight from the amount of contact that they have with customers. So they might be people from support or sales and marketing, or you know, if it's a nursing, a medical thing, the people at the coalface who have that direct contact with the customers.
You can have two deciders as well, can't you? I mean, there is that. One of the ones that I've done is we had a commercial stakeholder who sort of shared responsibility for conversion rate with the head of product. And they rarely actually got together and worked collaboratively on anything, and so we had them both in the room and working together and having the discussions in front of the group, which was really useful because they were a little bit siloed and they, you know, breaking down those barriers and seeing their bosses have these discussions was quite important.
It's all right as long as they're nice discussions. Otherwise, it's like watching your parents argue.
Yeah, but you know, it was carefully facilitated. Yeah, so you can have a couple, but they obviously have to make a decision, right? So they allow for that.
Do you have any advice on sending it into organisations as my I mean, people that you're going to be talking to are already kind of invested in the kind of agency approach and looking at what to build, but do you have any advice for people selling it to people who haven't spoken to you? And not in that mindset.
So, assuming that they're about to invest quite a lot of money in this product, so you know, product teams cost quite a lot of money each week. We're expensive people, and you know, that clock keeps ticking each week. So I think it really comes down to, if they don't have the vision to see the benefit directly, talk to them in cash terms about the kind of ROI. You know, do you want to spend the next 6 months on something that matters, or do you want to carry on possibly going in the wrong direction? Product team's a bit like a tunnel mining machine, can go very fast, but if you don't point it in the right direction, it's never going to get to where you need to go. So, cheesy analogy, but at the back, Stripey.
Have you ever tried to do this on a smaller scale, so like a shorter time period, maybe for a feature rather than a whole product?
Yeah, Al's done that.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I think you have to sort of squeeze it down. It wasn't a whole new product. It was a kind of purchase flow. I still think it would have benefited from a longer period of time. I think it works as well for features as it does for new products. I think there need to be features that there's a certain level of uncertainty about, you know, and they're chunky enough and they're important enough to the business for the wider stakeholder group to want to engage with it. I think if it's just like if it's a smaller enhancement or a smaller question that the design and development team can sort of answer on their own, the same techniques apply. You still want to, you know, prototype something and test it with users, but you maybe don't need to go through this very structured process, because a lot of it is about creating alignment, and particularly with people who are more strategic, to enable the team to then progress more quickly and more collaboratively.
Hi.
Yeah, just wondering from your experience you've been able to quantify the effectiveness of this, because you look at it on the face of it and you're taking something that would have taken 6, 7, 8 weeks, and over in a week, is what you're ending up with at the end of that week as good as you'd have got at the end of the 8 weeks, or does it save a couple of weeks, or what effectiveness are you getting from doing this?
Yeah. I'd say they're two different things, because you tend to use them in slightly different situations. So this would be more in the situation where the 6-week option wasn't on the table, or wasn't viable to do in that situation. So it's not like we're saying, okay, we've saved 7 weeks of effort because we haven't done the other thing. It's like, okay, we've got the next 3 months worth of work on the right track because we've done this intervention at this point. So therefore, your effectiveness has gone up. But we've never really put numbers on that.
And I think if you spend longer prototyping and you bottom out more kind of unanswered questions about how this thing might work, then you'll end up with a higher quality, more high fidelity idea. But if it turns out that idea is not resonating with customers, or there's some fundamental flaw, then you've wasted 6 weeks out of So you're looking for that kind of tight feedback loop, sort of the lean startup model where you're trying to get rapid feedback on kind of your core assumptions to either invalidate or validate those, so that you can then proceed with more confidence and maybe then go into the next level of detail, another iteration, or can it and come and pivot and start again. So it's kind of, you see what I'm saying? It's kind of they're sort of two different solutions to different problems, I suppose.
So recruiting like users or prospects for user testing can be challenging, especially like B2B or kind of you enter a new market thing, so you don't have contact details to existing users. So could you share like 2 or 3 examples how you did it and what worked for you? Did you use agencies or guerrilla testing as well?
So sometimes if the budget's there, it's great to use an agency because you can just, it's their problem then, and you don't have to worry about it. But you can also do things like Facebook ads. So you can do very targeted advertising now on Facebook quite cost effectively and direct people through to a screener. We've also done stuff with kind of find a community that's in the area. Go to the organizer of that community to say, would any of your members be interested in taking part in this? There's an incentive. So just
There's
a bit of
FNO, I
hustle.
think, which is a screener you can have linked into your site, so that those people who are already on your site can then see a little pop-up, would you like to take part in research?
Sorry, what was that called?
FNO? Yeah. So a method of gathering participants for research. Yeah, in the book, they're in San Francisco. They use Craigslist. You know, I gather it's easy. We don't have that here, but I think Facebook is probably the closest we've got to gathering users. Sorry? Gumtree is another one, yeah.
Yep.
Anyone else got like any suggestions for quick ways of finding participants without spending lots of money?
Guerrilla testing, so basically go on the web and look for the contacts where people are and try to get feedback there and things.
Yeah.
Full B2B meetups are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
I mean, it's tricky if you don't have the ability to kind of get ads or some kind of message in front of potential customers, then you're going to need to plan a bit further in advance before your sprint to get those people there. You know, you can't. You'll be able to turn it down around in 3 days. We just this for the Department of Health. We had to go and find some quite difficult to find users. That's very important that we speak to a range of users with different levels of digital engagement and different levels of kind of knowledge about various things. And so we had to go and search high and low, and it took weeks. But yeah, so you need to sort of bear that in mind when you're planning your sprint.
And do you tend to like explore like commercial business models around products that you're developing during design sprints, or kind of leave it to that? Because it's validation of the idea, right?
It's really about, yeah, so we built up we have an insight, and we believe that this might work, but what's the idea that we can use to get, or what's the representation of the idea we can use to get feedback on that? Like I was saying, I mean, if you want to understand whether people will pay for it or what the size of the market is, you might want to use other techniques like other MVPs, landing pages, concierge, that kind of thing. This is more about where a user interview is a useful research method. Anybody else before we wrap up and drink beer? I'm certainly going to drink some beer. Maybe a G&T.
Who's going to be on the boat later? A few people? Cool. Okay, well, thanks very much. Thanks for giving us your attention. We appreciate it.